I'm going to do briefly now at an accelerated pace is give you a brief update of where we are in terms of field work and data collection, and Michael will say a few things about the delivery of the area wellbeing profiles for each of your sites, the timing of that. I'm going to do a rapid review of what the functions of these data are that we're collecting, how we'll be using the data in the strategy development days. I'm going to give you an introduction to what your area wellbeing profile is actually going to look like. These are 99% finished now. We're just kind of crossing the T's and dotting the I's on those, so they're pretty much there. And then, depending on how much time we've got, we'll spend some time actually just looking at some of the charts that we'll be providing and presenting at the strategy days. If we've got time, we'll kind of play around with that on your tables to help you learn how to read and interpret some of the data. And then we'll think about, okay, well, how does this data fit along with other sources of data intelligence that you may already have locally, and how might we feed that into the strategy development process, particularly at the strategy development days. So that's kind of what I'm going to cover in 43 minutes. Okay, in terms of field work, we're currently about 80% complete. We have over 9,000 surveys completed across the areas in England. We are a little bit behind where we had initially planned to be, and that's primarily because we've had a couple of challenges in a small number of sites which have taken extra work and resource to get on top of. Those issues have been really well resolved, but that had a slight knock-on effect across the board. But generally things are progressing very well. I just wanted to say a thank you to all of the roles that you've been playing in the small number of sites where we've had various challenges. The response from the sites, you guys, in helping deal and respond to those challenges has been phenomenal, and it's really helped. So I think we're in this quite remarkable position actually where we have over 9,000 interviews collected with only a handful of challenges, which is a lot less than we would have expected. So, so generally things are progressing very well, and all sites are on track to have their data as planned, certainly well ahead of the strategy days. Okay, so I'm going to move now on to going through some of the functions, a quick reminder of some of the functions of the data at the strategy day. How are we going to be using these data, and what are these data going to tell you? Much of this will be familiar to you, so I'm going to whip through it fairly quickly. The first key function, as you'll know, is we're going to use these data to help you think about where you're going to prioritise, which outcomes, which children's outcomes are you going to be prioritising within your strategy development process. You're going to have great data on a bunch of outcomes that you simply won't have good data on, things like communication and language development, kids' social and emotional development. You'll get new data on those outcomes, and these data will help you identify where need is greatest in your particular areas and help you focus down on where you want to be focusing your investments and your activities on. So prioritising key developmental outcomes is the first function. A second is getting a sense of the match between existing service provision and the need within the population. So giving you a sense of what's the scope of the issues and the needs that you're dealing with within your community, and how might you need to think quite radically different about how services are going to meet those needs within a population. So this will illustrate some of those kind of big kind of picture threats and challenges that you're going to be needing to address within your strategy development. Third function of the data is helping you think about a good balance of different intervention approaches. And what I mean by this is the data will help, once you've identified particular outcomes to be focusing on, the data will also help guide you to think about what types of approaches may be best to improve outcomes. Is it going to be a focus on universal health promotion or universal prevention or public health? Perhaps a more early intervention targeted approach on that 30% of the population. Or are we looking for this particular outcome at a much more targeted treatment intervention on a smaller population, part of the population? The focus here is on population level change, but what we'll be looking for is likely a balance of different approaches to achieve the outcomes that you want. And these data will help guide which types of those approaches are going to be most suitable for given outcomes that you are interested in. And again, during the strategy development process, we'll be guiding you through some of those approaches and how the data can help you understand that. Fourth function is giving you some further specificity around specific interventions and activities that may be most appropriate for those particular outcomes that you're focusing upon. So, for example, you may prioritise communication and language development as perhaps that comes out in your data as a real area of concern, and you want to be and the types of interventions that would be appropriate in your given context may be a mixture of universal promotion and some early intervention in a particular population. The data will also be thinking, okay, what particular types of services are going to help us achieve these outcomes? It may be that community cohesion and family management practices come out as a particular area of concern. So these data will help you get more narrow and focused on what particular types of services and activities are going to be most likely to achieve those outcomes. It's not going to tell you exactly what programs and what services to pick and choose, but it will help you guide that process. And again, we'll be walking you through that during the strategy development days. Another function is to help you estimate the kind of size and characteristics of the particular populations that you're working with. So again, taking this for sake of argument, communication and language development, what number of kids are you looking at here? What's their demography? What characterises those kids that you want to be working with? So the data will help you understand better the target populations which you're seeking to work with. It may be all kids, it may be a particular proportion of the population, but the data will help you understand that. Another function will be helping you set some realistic targets about the improvements in outcomes that you want to achieve. Too often we see very bold statements like, we're going to eradicate all problems, we're going to eradicate poverty, we're going to fix every single kid in the local classroom. We know that that's not realistic. These data will tell you, give you a baseline as to where you are now, and we will be guiding you through a process of helping you set some realistic targets. Aspirational, we want to be aspirational here, but we also want to be realistic. We don't want to be coming up with empty statements. So the data will help us do that, and we'll bring to bear some processes to help guide those realistic expectations during the strategy days. And the final thing, which we won't do this so much at the strategy days, but these data will form a baseline for you that you can, over time, monitor changes in outcomes. And this is kind of related to the kind of data dashboards idea that we're talking about. But this is provide you with a starting point which you can, if you wanted to, repeat over time and see what population level changes you may be achieving over a 2, 3, 5, 10-year period. So those are the kind of functions of the data. You'll have the data in the area wellbeing profile, which I'll talk about in a document, and we'll be expanding on many of these ideas throughout the strategy development days and guiding you through those processes. Okay, right, I'm going to move on to introducing you to the area wellbeing profile itself. A lot of work has gone into producing this actual document. Like I said, at the strategy development days, we will be presenting this to you in a very slow, simple, accessible way, and it will take up a lot of our time and focus and attention. But all of the data is being pulled together into this one document that you'll be able to take away with you, and it's this area wellbeing profile. It has 5 main sections, some introduction to some of the concepts and the outcomes that we're measuring, but it's really these three. The bulk of the area wellbeing profile is these 3 elements: a summary of the key developmental outcomes, how kids in your local areas are doing on these key developmental outcomes. That's one chart. Second is a summary of risk factors in your local area. That's a second chart. And the third is that kind of circle diagram that you saw briefly earlier, an estimation of the level of need within a community, the degree to which services are matching that. That's basically 3 charts, and that is going to be where the vast majority of our focus during the strategy development days is going to be. So that's 3 pages. But of course, these data are so rich. There's so much in there. So what we actually end up with is about a 60-page document where a lot more detail goes into this area wellbeing profile. So the appendices contain things about how to read the data. You'll get a lot of further information about each of the key developmental outcomes. So, and I'll show you what that looks like, but it will give you a further breakdown of how kids are doing on that particular outcome, what's the gender and the ethnicity breakdown for that, how related outcomes looking like, how related risk factors to that, and some other contextual data in there as well. So you're going to get an awful lot of extra detail within this area wellbeing profile, and of course we will have that available. So during the strategy development days, we spend a lot of time on the outcomes, but then if you guys are focusing in particular on particular outcomes, we can then take a much deeper dive and really understand those outcomes, and we'll have all of that information with us, and you'll have it available to take away with you afterwards. And of course there's a whole bunch of boring stuff around methodology, sample sizes, confidence intervals, and definitions that go into that as well. Michael always gives me a hard time when I start talking about method, but it's there, it's just buried down in the bottom. So anyway, so that's an introduction to the area wellbeing profile. We're just in the process of finishing that structure off, and we'll be populating each of those profiles within, we've got about 2 hours to produce each one. We get your data, you press a button, it analyses all the data, it automatically populates charts, and they go into this. So although the data collection is running very tight, we're rapidly turning around these reports within a day for each. Okay, so that's the area wellbeing profile itself. We've got about 15 minutes, so I want to spend some time on introducing you to what the charts and things kind of look like. So, how to read the key developmental outcome summary charts. Let me just, I'll pass around kind of some handouts of these in a minute. I won't do it just now. So apologies if it's not so easy to see, the screen's a little bit small, but I'll walk you through it. But what essentially what we're doing, we have these kind of 8 key developmental outcomes. Stuff around healthy gestation and birth, low birth weight, prematurity, that comes from existing administrative data that you already have. Data on communication and language development, social and emotional development, readiness for school, behaviour problems, self-regulation, and chronic health conditions, including obesity. Those are the key developmental outcomes that we're going to be initially focusing on. You'll have data on things like low birth weight and prematurity already, that's what's kind of building in. Many of these other things that we're measuring we know are so central and critical to children's health and development, and these are a strong focus for the Big Lottery Fund as well. These are new data that you are not likely to have good information on already. And then what we'll do is we'll show you the proportion of children within your local areas at a local authority level who have problems in each of these areas. And we'll slowly build up the slides so you can be seeing how the prevalence of problems are. So the higher the bars, the greater the proportion of children that have problems in each of those areas. And what I'm showing here is an example of what it might look like in a hypothetical local authority. Don't try and guess who this is, because it isn't any of you, okay? I made it up. And then we could spend some time adding in, well, what do things look like within our individual target wards, the particular communities of focus for you, and we're taking those and combining them for the purposes of this summary. So you can see how the target communities compare to the local authority overall. So that's the kind of the basis of the chart. And then of course we add in this question about the points of comparison. So then we overlay that with a comparison. This comparison is actually going to be the average of all of the 15 sites. So so the point of comparison here is, largely speaking, an economically deprived, primarily urban area in England. Where available, these are mostly new data that aren't currently available. But however, for some of these outcomes, we have a more normative population, either from England, occasionally from overseas. So we'll also add that point of comparison too. And this is a similar chart, I'm not going to build it up kind of slowly, but this is a similar chart looking at risk factors. And again, a similar kind of principle, list of risk factors measured in the survey here, ranging from economic and community indicators, things like overcrowding, accommodation, social cohesion, what the physical environment is like, through to parent risk factors, things around social support. We have great data on parent mental health using a well-validated screening tool there, levels of social support, for example, from parents. Then we have a bunch of risk factors related to family functioning itself, things like family management practices, to which rules and routines are set up and established and so on, the engagement of parents in the children's learning. And then we have some individual child-focused risk factors, things like exercise, hyperactivity, and then we have some risk factors that we know are critical in the gestation period and infancy, mother substance use during pregnancy, breastfeeding, and so on. So a whole series of risk factors, and again, a bar for the local authority. I haven't got a key here. The light pink one is the local authority overall, the darker purple one is the individual kind of target, the target wards combined, and again, a point of comparison. Again, we won't just splurge that out on the screen like I'm doing now. Spend a lot of time working through this, slowly introducing these. So these two slides form the kind of the crux where we're going to spend a lot of attention. So questions?
Just points and comparison that's going to be on there, really.
Yep.
I wonder why, really, because all of our areas are so greatly different. Not really. So why are we? Because if big lottery was then getting this whole document, they might say, well, actually, then we've read that, and actually, compared to where they are, the needs rates there and not there. So how much weight is going to be on that with comparative data?
No, it's a great question. The reason we have a point of comparison, on one level, it's not very meaningful. I mean, what the hell is the average child across your 15 areas? What does that mean? Similarly, what's the average child across England look like? Again, it doesn't mean that much, but without any comparison at all, you've got no idea whether, are problems in social emotional development, are they high or are they low? In this particular example, the problems look pretty elevated relative to the point of comparison. Without that, you'd have no idea whether or not it's relatively high or relatively low. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that the points of comparison shouldn't necessarily be driving where things get prioritised. It may well be the case that in this example here, although poor social emotional development would look like a candidate for prioritisation there because it's much more elevated to the point of comparison, and communication and language development is actually, there's fewer problems than the point of comparison here. That doesn't mean that a social and emotional development is where you should be prioritising. It may be that this is unacceptable for you, even though it's lower. It may still be unacceptable for you, and you want to do something about it. There may be other things that are driving the process of prioritisation. So the comparisons are just for context. They shouldn't be telling you where to focus upon. And again, we'll spend a lot of attention and time exploring these kind of ideas during the strategy development days. Yes.
Maybe it's just because I'm a bit of a geek, but actually I think it was really useful, and I'm actually quite excited about getting my hands on it. But obviously, after what we've just said, I'm not allowed to until.
We'll put it to the partnership to make a decision.
But yeah, it looks really good actually. So yeah, I'll be really keen to explore some of that with you, and actually, I suppose in the longer term, think about how much it actually costs to deliver it and how we could replicate it further, because some of those areas are things that ourselves and public health and other colleagues would love to be able to get more sort of up-to-date data on a long-term basis on it. So I think it would be really helpful, even outside of this project as well.
Just a point on that. Some of these things, communication, language development, social and emotional development, it's likely that with a new range of kind of public health indicators coming through, it's likely actually that some of these data may start to be collected routinely by health officers using the same measure the ages and stages screening tool that we use. So actually, you guys are going to be in a fantastic position because you're going to be ahead of the game. You're going to have some of these data before they start routinely collecting it too. So we're excited about it. Yes.
Just a quick clarification. When you're comparing the local authority, are you using nationally available data, or are you using stuff from the questionnaire?
We're using stuff from the questionnaire. So when we're doing these surveys in each of your local areas, we are knocking on 600 interviews. That will give us. We're doing the survey in a way that we're going to get representative data across the entire local authority, and then we've oversampled in the target ward, which we've got sufficient.
So that including low birth weight?
Low birth weight and prematurity, we're actually drawing upon existing data there because there's great data. Okay, let me very quickly summarise through some of the things you want to be looking out for in the data. Look for patterns and exceptions to the patterns. You'll see in the example that I showed you, earlier. We saw that problems were elevated in all the target wards on most outcomes, but there were some exceptions to that. We're interested in patterns, trends, and exceptions there to those patterns. Like I said, higher bars, longer bars mean that there's greater levels of problems, but just because one bar is higher than the other doesn't necessarily mean it's worse, and that's where you should be focusing on. So, for example, in the example I showed you there, rates of social emotional development were pretty high, and rates of the indicators around healthy gestation and birth were pretty low. But that doesn't necessarily mean that communication or language development is more important than healthy gestation and birth. So there's a process of thinking about what's most important for you relatively. The data don't tell you where to focus upon. The points of comparisons, we talked about this, they provide some context, but they don't alone drive where you should be prioritising outcomes. You are the experts in interpreting the data. We've collected these data and we'll present it to you, but it's going to be part of your job at the strategy development days to help interpret that. There may be some things that to us we find quite surprising and strange, and we don't quite understand, but you, with your local intelligence, your understanding of your own communities, the community partnerships, understanding of the communities in which they live and work, will help interpret and understand those data. So the point I'm making is that you will be the experts and you will be the ones who are interpreting the data, not us. And as I said, the data won't tell you, the data alone won't tell you what to do, and there'll be other sources of data intelligence that you'll be bringing along that will also help drive and inform the prioritisation of outcomes and development of these strategies.